My name is Ilara Holt. I'm 21 years old. And 2 days before my mother died, she told me something that I didn't fully understand until almost a year after her death. She said, "If anyone ever tells you my illness was discovered too late, don't believe them." At the time, I thought the medication had confused her. But now, looking back, it feels like she was warning me about something. My mother's name was Renee Holt. We lived in a small town near Toledo, Ohio. At home it was just me, my mother Renee, and my grandmother Mavis. My father had left when I was little. We hadn't spoken to him in years. Officially, everyone said the same thing. My mother's cancer had been diagnosed too late. That's what people around town believed. Even at the funeral, people kept saying, if only they had caught it earlier. Even the doctor treating my mother kept repeating that same line. His name was Dr. Calder Wynn. He was well known in our area. He hosted charity events, appeared on local news. People respected him a lot. And honestly, if someone had asked me back then, I probably would have believed the same thing everyone else did. But later I realized, some people in our town already knew the truth. Nobody just wanted to say it out loud. Actually, let me ask you something. If you ever felt like your family had been hiding something huge from you for years, would you try to uncover the truth? Or is it better to leave some things buried in the past? Because what I did back then changed my entire life. At first, my mother only complained about stomach pain. She didn't take it seriously in the beginning. One night, I walked into the kitchen and saw her holding onto the counter. Yes. "Mom, are you okay?" She immediately stood up straight and said, "Yeah, just acid reflux." But the next week we went to see a specialist. The same doctor, Dr. Calder Wynn. On the drive back after the first appointment I asked, "What did he say?" My mother Renee answered, "Nothing serious." But she didn't seem normal. She checked the rearview mirror twice, then stared out the window. "Yes, everything's okay, right?" She only said, "Yeah." After that I started noticing little things. After returning from the hospital, my mother would step outside to take phone calls. She started hiding medical papers from me. And the strangest part, she suddenly began paying everything in cash. One day I asked, "Is there a problem with the insurance?" She immediately said, "No." But that same night, I got up to get water and overheard her talking to my grandmother Mavis in the kitchen. My grandmother quietly asked, "Do you think they know?" My mother stayed silent for a long time. Then she said, "I think they knew from the beginning." I stopped in the hallway. I assumed they were talking about the insurance company, or maybe hospital administration. Then my grandmother asked, "If you suspected something, then why did you keep getting treatment there?" For a few seconds my mother didn't say anything. Then she gave an answer that stayed stuck in my head for months after her death. She said, "Because by the time I understood the truth, it was already too late." At the time I thought she was talking about her illness. But almost a year after she died, I found a folded pharmacy receipt inside an old recipe box in the kitchen. The receipt was under my mother Renee's name, and the date printed on it was 8 months earlier than her official diagnosis. At first, when I saw the receipt, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. I read it 2 or 3 times. The name on it was my mother's, Renee Holt. The medication listed was the same kind given to cancer patients, and the date was a full 8 months earlier than her official diagnosis. My mind got stuck right there. If they had known about the illness 8 months earlier, then why had the doctor told everyone it was a late diagnosis? And why had my mother hidden it from us? Right then I heard the front door close. My grandmother Mavis had just come back with groceries. Still holding the receipt, I walked into the living room. The second she saw me, she asked, "What's wrong?" Without saying anything, I handed her the receipt. The moment she saw the date, her face changed. Actually changed. She didn't look shocked. She looked like she had been afraid this day would eventually come. She immediately took the receipt from my hand. "Yes, Mom knew 8 months earlier. She didn't answer. I asked again. Did you know about this? My grandmother Mavis folded the receipt, then placed it quietly on the kitchen counter. For a long time she said nothing. Then finally she whispered, "Your mother never wanted you to find that." Yes. But why? She looked directly at me. Because that day, she didn't just find out about the illness. A strange feeling spread through my entire body. Then what did she find out? She didn't answer right away. Instead she asked, "Where exactly did you find this?" I pointed toward the recipe box. She let out a long breath, then quietly said, "She burned the rest of the papers." Froze. The rest of the papers. She immediately changed the subject. "You need to let this go, Ilara." Now it was becoming painfully obvious that something had been hidden from me, and probably for a very long time. That night I went to my room but I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the same thoughts over and over again. If my mother had known earlier, then why did the treatment continue there? And why had she suddenly started paying everything in cash? Around 1 a.m. I went downstairs to get water. My grandmother Mavis was sitting alone in the kitchen. The lights were off. Only the small light above the stove was on. When she saw me, she quietly asked, "Can't sleep?" I looked straight at her and asked, "What was Mom afraid of?" She immediately looked at me. For a few seconds she didn't say anything. Then she replied, "Your mother wasn't afraid." He said, "Then why did she get uncomfortable every time someone mentioned that hospital?" No answer. I had just started turning away when she suddenly asked, "Did you find anything else besides that receipt?" Stop. What do you mean? She shook her head. Nothing. But now I was completely sure she knew far more than she was saying. The next day, I started going through my mother's old belongings. Most of the files were missing. But on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, I found an old blue folder. Inside were bills, insurance papers, and appointment slips. I started checking the dates. Then something strange caught my attention. My mother's official diagnosis happened in May. But inside the folder there was also an appointment slip from February. Different location, different doctor. And the strangest part, insurance hadn't been used for that appointment at all. Cash payment. I flipped the paper over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, there was only one sentence. "If Calder finds out, everything will be over." My heart started pounding. 'Cause for the first time, I realized my mother hadn't just been sick. She had been hiding something. That night I barely slept at all. The same sentence kept replaying in my head over and over again. If Calder finds out, everything will be over. What exactly was my mother afraid of? And if she didn't trust the doctor, then why did she continue treatment there? The next morning I opened the blue folder again. I started studying the appointment slip more carefully. The clinic wasn't in our town. It was a small private imaging center near the Michigan border. The date was in February, which meant almost 3 months before the official diagnosis. I searched the clinic on Google, but the website was gone. Phone number disconnected. Now things felt even stranger. I thought maybe my grandmother Mavis would finally explain something. But the second I mentioned the clinic's name, she immediately said, "You need to stop digging into this." Yes. Why did Mom go there? She didn't answer. She only said, "Some things don't help once you know them." That answer made me even more suspicious. Because normally, my grandmother avoided conversations. But this time she looked genuinely nervous. That same afternoon I was cleaning out the garage. My mother's old car was still parked there. Nobody had even touched it since she died. When I sat inside, I noticed papers stuffed inside the glove compartment. Mostly gas receipts, fast food bills. Then I found a folded envelope. No address, no stamp. Just my mother's handwriting across the front. "If something happens to me, destroy this." My heart immediately started pounding. I opened the envelope. Inside was only a USB drive. And one small sticky note. Written on it were the words. They said the report was normal. That was it. My hands went cold. I immediately ran inside and opened my laptop. I plugged in the USB. There was only one audio file on it. The date matched the February appointment. Press play. At first, the audio was unclear. Then I heard my mother Renee's voice. She sounded nervous. She was speaking to a man. But Wynne told me the scan was clear. The man on the other side replied, "That's what I don't understand." I heard papers being shuffled around. Then the man said, "Ms. Holt, this report is not clear." My breath caught instantly. A few seconds of silence filled the recording. Then my mother quietly asked, "Then why would he tell me that?" The man didn't answer right away. Then he only said, "Have you spoken to another specialist?" The audio ended there. I stared at the screen for several seconds. My mind had gone numb, which meant either my mother had been given false information, or someone had intentionally hidden the truth from her. But the biggest question was still the same. Why? That's when I suddenly felt someone standing behind me. I turned around. My grandmother Mavis was standing in the doorway. I had no idea how long she'd been there. She looked at the screen, then at me, and for the first time, there wasn't just fear on her face anymore. There was guilt too. Quietly she asked, "You listened to the whole recording?" "Yes." "You knew about this?" She didn't answer immediately. I turned the laptop toward her. "Mom found out in February that something was wrong." My grandmother slowly sat down in the chair. She closed her eyes. Then after a long silence, she finally whispered, "After that appointment, your mother wanted to go to the police." My heart slammed against my chest. "The police?" She nodded slowly. "But then something happened." "What?" She looked directly at me, and very quietly said, 2 days later, Calder Wynne came to our house for the first time. For a few seconds, I just stared at my grandmother Mavis. I couldn't understand why a doctor would visit a patient's house. And even if he did, why was my grandmother talking about it like that was the moment everything changed? Yes. Why did he come here? She didn't answer right away. She just kept staring down at the table. Then quietly said, "After that second clinic appointment, your mother decided she wanted to stop treatment." The question hit my mind instantly. Then why didn't she stop? My grandmother replied softly, "Because after that night, your mother changed." Now a real sense of uneasiness started spreading through me. What happened that night? She slowly shook her head. "I don't know what she told you, but after that visit, your mother became afraid of that man. The doctor." She didn't answer directly. She only said, "After he came here, she started removing all the papers from the house." Now everything was becoming even more confusing. If my mother had already learned the truth, then why did she keep going back to the same doctor? Yes. Did Calder threaten her? For the first time, my grandmother Mavis looked directly at me. And in that moment, it felt like she was deciding how much I deserved to know. Then she quietly said, "Your mother only told me one thing." Waited. Very softly she said, "She told me, if I say anything right now, people will think I'm the liar." Something clicked in my head. Why? But my grandmother didn't answer. I immediately asked, "Did the hospital do something?" "I didn't say that." "But you're hiding something." This time, a little frustration entered her voice. "Because you don't know the full story." Silence filled the house. A few seconds later, she quietly added, "Your mother wasn't perfect, Ilara." Froze. What does that mean? Before answering, she took a long breath, then said, "When she first became suspicious, she didn't tell anyone." Why? Because she was afraid that if she stopped treatment midway through, the insurance claim would get rejected. I frowned in confusion. But if the doctor was wrong then? She cut me off immediately. At the time we didn't realize how wrong. That sentence stuck in my head instantly. How wrong meant what exactly? Then my eyes drifted toward an old stack of mail sitting on the kitchen counter. A white envelope was sitting on top. Casually picked it up. The sender address was from the hospital. The date was only 4 days before my mother died. I opened the envelope. Inside was only a single-page document. No letter. No explanation. Just an updated billing summary. But one line near the bottom had been highlighted. Previous imaging records unavailable at this time. I immediately read the paper again. Unavailable. How could they be unavailable? Those scans existed. I had audio proof. I handed the paper to my grandmother. The second she saw it, she closed her eyes. Yes. How can Mom's reports just disappear? Quietly, she said. Because when your mother asked for copies, the hospital told her the exact same thing. A cold feeling rushed through my entire body. What do you mean? She looked directly at me and very quietly said, her original scans never appeared again in the official records. For a few seconds, I just stared at my grandmother Mavis. Honestly, I still couldn't fully understand how serious this actually was. Could medical records really just disappear? Or had my mother misunderstood something? But then I remembered the audio recording. The man at the second clinic had clearly said, "This report is not clear," which meant something had already shown up in February. Then how did everything continue like normal until May? Yes. Mom tried getting copies of the scans. My grandmother nodded slowly. Several times. And then, she quietly said, every time there was another excuse. System update. Missing authorization. Delayed processing. I stayed silent. 'Cause for the first time, this no longer felt like a simple medical mistake. Something about it felt intentional. Then suddenly my grandmother said, during the last few months, your mother started recording phone calls. I immediately turned toward her. What? She nodded. Hospital calls, appointments, insurance conversations. My heart started racing. Where are those recordings? She didn't answer. I asked again. Are there more recordings like the one on the USB? This time she quietly said, I don't know. But it was obvious she wasn't telling me everything. That night I went down to the basement. Most of my mother's old belongings were stored there. Boxes, old clothes, tax papers. I started digging through random files. About half an hour later I found a small black notebook. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, there was only one word. Calls. I sat down right there on the floor. Then opened it. Inside were dates, hospital extension numbers, short notes, few names, and over again, one word kept appearing. Recorded. My hands genuinely started turning cold, which meant my mother had been completely convinced that something was wrong. But then why didn't she tell anyone? I kept flipping through the pages. Then my eyes stopped on one specific entry. The date matched the day Dr. Calder-Wynne came to our house for the first time. Underneath it, there was only one sentence written. Today he finally admitted he saw the report. My mind went numb. Admitted. Which meant before that, he had been denying it. I immediately started flipping through the notebook again. Some pages had been torn out. Deliberately, I ran upstairs. My grandmother was still in the kitchen. I dropped the notebook in front of her. The second she saw it, she looked away. Yes. Who tore those pages out? She didn't answer. I asked again. What did Mom record? A few seconds of silence passed. Then quietly she said, your mother told me, if anything ever happened to her, these recordings needed to reach the police. A chill ran through my body. The police. She nodded slowly. Yes. Then why didn't you do anything? This time, frustration entered my grandmother's voice. Because later on, your mother stopped herself. Froze. What do you mean? She placed both hands on the table. Then quietly said. After that, Calder-Wynne told her something. What? She shook her head. I don't know. But then she suddenly went silent, like she had realized she'd already said too much. I immediately asked, "What did he tell her?" She wouldn't look at me anymore. She only whispered one thing. "After that conversation, your mother stopped making recordings completely." I just kept staring at my grandmother Mavis. None of it was making sense anymore. If my mother had truly been afraid, then why hide all the papers? And if she wasn't afraid, then why never go to the police? Everything felt incomplete, like parts of the story were being intentionally kept from me. Yes. What did he say to Mom? My grandmother didn't answer right away. Then quietly said, "I wasn't there. But Mom must have told you something." She slowly shook her head. She only said that after that conversation, she couldn't trust anyone anymore. That sentence got stuck in my head instantly. Couldn't trust anyone anymore? Meaning not just the doctor. Then who else? Suddenly something hit me. During the last few months of her life, my mother had almost completely stopped using her regular phone. She had started carrying around a small flip phone instead. At the time I thought it was just an old habit. But now every tiny detail suddenly felt suspicious. I started searching through the remaining boxes in the basement. About 30 minutes later I found a brown envelope. On the front, in my mother Renee's handwriting, were the words, "If you're finding this, then I'm probably not here to explain it myself." My heart immediately started pounding. I opened the envelope. Inside was an old flip phone and a folded piece of paper. On the paper were only 4 phone numbers. No names, just numbers. And underneath them, one sentence. "Only one of these men is telling the truth." A cold feeling rushed through my entire body. For people. Who were they? I immediately plugged the phone into a charger. After a few minutes, it finally turned on. The phone contained nothing except a full voicemail inbox. No photos. No text messages. Only voicemails. I played the first message. A woman's voice spoke softly. "Renee, if you keep asking for the records, they're going to get suspicious." Froze. Who was they? The message ended. I played the second voicemail. This time it was a man. "You don't understand. If this gets out, all of us are finished." My breath caught instantly. All of us. Which meant this wasn't just about one doctor. Played the third voicemail. This time it was my mother's voice. She wasn't crying. But she didn't sound normal either. She quietly said, "After what I saw in that scan, I realized they lied to me." My hands started shaking. But the voicemail suddenly cut off. Just ended right there. I opened the fourth message. A few seconds of static played first. In Dr. Calder Wynn's voice. "Renee, you're making this situation more dangerous than it really is." My mother immediately replied, "Dangerous for me, or dangerous for you?" Silence. Then Calder said, "You're thinking emotionally." My mother answered, "No. I'm just trying to understand how the February report suddenly disappeared from the system." My heart slammed against my chest. Because for the first time, someone had finally said out loud the exact thing I'd been terrified of. The report had disappeared. But then Calder said something that completely shook me. He said, "Renee, you're forgetting that my name wasn't the only one on that report." The entire room suddenly felt heavy. I replayed the voicemail. Listened to it again. Same sentence. Which meant other people were involved too. But who? That's when I suddenly heard my grandmother Mavis behind me. "You should never have turned that phone on." I turned around. She was standing at the top of the basement stairs. And for the first time, there was more panic on her face than fear. I quietly asked, "Who exactly was Mom planning to go against?" My grandmother stared at me for a few seconds, then very quietly said, "At first, she thought it was just one doctor making a mistake." She stopped to take a breath, then whispered. But later, she realized the entire system wanted to keep her quiet. After hearing that line from my grandmother Mavis, I felt genuinely afraid for the first time. Because now, This no longer sounded like the story of one corrupt doctor. If multiple people were involved, then what exactly had my mother gotten herself caught in? Yes. Did Mom ever talk to a lawyer? My grandmother immediately said, yes. Froze. What? Quietly, she continued. About 3 months before she died, your mother contacted a malpractice lawyer. My heart slammed against my chest. And then, she looked at me. Then the lawyer suddenly refused to take the case. Why? He never gave a reason. Now everything was becoming even stranger. A missing report, hidden recordings, cash payments, a lawyer backing out. But the most disturbing part was this. My mother still never publicly accused anyone. Why? Then suddenly I remembered something about the flip phone. It only had voicemails, no contacts, but I had never checked the call history. I immediately opened the phone again. In the recent calls, one number kept appearing over and over. Late-night calls. For months, I searched the number on Google. Nothing came up. No name. But under a related result, an address appeared. Downtown Toledo. I zoomed in on the address, and my breath stopped. It wasn't a hospital. The building belonged to a record storage company. Medical Archives Warehouse. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Why had my mother been repeatedly calling a medical storage facility instead of the hospital? Then I suddenly remembered a line from one of the voicemails. If you keep asking for the records, they're going to get suspicious. Records. Thought suddenly hit me. Was my mother trying to find the original scans? I immediately turned to my grandmother Mavis. Did Mom ever go to some kind of warehouse? She looked at me instantly. Too quickly. So quickly that I immediately knew she understood exactly what I was asking. Who told you that? Just answer me. A few seconds of silence passed. Then quietly she said, yes. Why? Before answering, she closed her eyes. Then softly said, because the hospital claimed the original imaging files had been transferred into archives. And when your mother got there, she suddenly stopped talking. Yes. What happened? She looked directly at me, and very quietly said, they told her that no files from that date had ever existed. A cold wave rushed through my entire body, which meant officially, the February report didn't exist at all. But there was audio proof. The appointment slip existed. The medication receipt existed, which meant someone had intentionally removed something. I was still processing all of that when I suddenly remembered something else. The recording on the USB drive. I reopened the audio file on my laptop. This time, I listened carefully to the final few seconds. At first, it only sounded like papers moving around. But when I increased the volume, I heard another man speaking faintly in the background. Very faintly. Put on headphones. Listened once. The third time my heart genuinely stopped. Because the man speaking in the background wasn't Dr. Calder Wynn. And he was saying, if Renee Holt gets the full report, we'll have to reopen the February case. Froze completely. Case? What case? And why would it need to be reopened? But something even more disturbing hit me right after that. Because in that exact moment I realized something for the first time. My mother wasn't the only patient in February. I just kept staring at the laptop screen. The man in the audio had said, reopen the case. Which meant this was no longer just about a missing report or a delayed diagnosis. Something had already happened before this. And whatever it was, someone was trying to bury it. Played the audio again. This time I focused only on the final few seconds. First, Calder Wynn's voice. Then the sound of papers moving. And then the same unknown man in the background. If Renee Holt gets the full report, we'll have to reopen the February case. Then suddenly the recording cut off. Like someone had ended it in a hurry. I sat there silently for a few seconds. Then suddenly I remembered something from the notebook. In my mother's black notebook, there were tiny initials written next to a few dates. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention to them. I immediately grabbed the notebook and sat down. Started flipping through the pages again. Then I found the February entry. Next to it, only 2 initials were written. RM. That was it. No full name. I looked at my grandmother Mavis. Who is RM? The second she saw the notebook, she looked away. I don't know. But now I knew she was lying. For the first time, I asked with actual frustration in my voice. How many things are you hiding from me? She immediately answered. I'm trying to protect you. From what? No answer. And somehow that was the part bothering me the most. Because when someone lies directly, at least you understand what's happening. But here, everyone kept speaking in half-truths. That night I couldn't sleep at all. Around 3 in the morning I started searching those initials online. Hospital records, obituaries, local news articles. After a while I found an old article, 3 years old. The headline was small. Local teacher dies after sudden illness. The name was Rachel Mercer. Initials, RM. My heart immediately started pounding. I opened the article. It said Rachel Mercer had also been treated by Dr. Calder-Wynne. And the strangest part. She died only 2 weeks before my mother's diagnosis. I read the entire article carefully. Then one sentence stopped me cold. Family declined further comment regarding medical concerns. Medical concerns. Which meant her family had suspected something too. I immediately searched Rachel Mercer online. Few old Facebook posts appeared. Normal family photos, school events, birthday pictures. Then I found her daughter's profile. Her name was Hannah Mercer. I stared at her profile for a long time. Then finally I sent a message. Hi. I know this probably sounds random. But was your mom treated by Dr. Calder-Wynne? After sending it I put my phone down. Honestly, I wasn't expecting a reply. But about 10 minutes later, the typing bubble appeared. Then a message came through. Who are you? I replied. My mother was one of his patients too. A few seconds passed without a response. Then Hannah sent only one sentence. Did your mother also ask for her records before she died? My hands instantly went cold. I quickly typed back. Yes. How do you know that? The typing bubble appeared again. Stayed there for a long time. Then disappeared. Then came back again. Like she couldn't decide how much she should say. Finally, her reply appeared. Because my mom did the exact same thing. My heartbeat sped up. Yes. What happened? This time it took almost a full minute for her to answer. Then her message appeared. She said the hospital was hiding something. I immediately typed. What? But after reading Hannah's next message, for the first time I realized this story was much bigger than my mother. She wrote, 1 week before she died. My mom asked me if there's any point in telling the truth when an entire town is willing to protect a respected man. After reading Hannah Mercer's message, I just sat there staring at the screen for a long time. 'Cause for the first time, I realized my mother hadn't been alone. And maybe that was exactly why she seemed so conflicted until the very end. If it had only happened to her, maybe she would have fought publicly. But now it felt like multiple people had discovered the same thing. And then suddenly gone silent. I asked Hannah, did your mom ever file a complaint? She didn't reply immediately. About 2 minutes later, a message appeared. She tried. And then, she didn't have the records anymore. My hands slowly started turning cold. Exactly the same thing. Missing records. Yes. Did your mom also go to another clinic? This time the reply came instantly. Yes. My heart slammed against my chest. I typed, the imaging center near Michigan. A few seconds passed without a response. Then one single word appeared. How do you know that? Now the pieces were slowly starting to connect. My mother, Rachel Mercer. The second clinic. Missing scans. Which meant this wasn't some random coincidence anymore. I didn't tell Hannah everything. I only wrote, my mom's files have gaps too. The moment her next message appeared, I realized she knew more than I did. She wrote, "Did your mom ever mention the St. Vincent Archive building?" I froze instantly. That was the same warehouse number. I immediately replied, "Yes." "Why?" This time Hannah took a long time to answer. Then finally she wrote, "My mom went there. And then she said she found something there. That wasn't in the hospital records." My heartbeat sped up. What did she find? The typing bubble appeared. Up. Then came back again. Finally, Hannah replied. She found scan files from another patient. I frowned in confusion. So, her response came immediately. That patient's official diagnosis date was different. Now I was slowly beginning to understand. Diagnosis timelines were being changed. But why? Insurance fraud. Hospital rankings. Avoiding lawsuits. I was still trying to process all of that when Hannah's next message arrived. My mom didn't think Calder-Wynne was acting alone. A heavy uneasiness spread through my body. Yes. Then who? Her reply came back. Hospital administration. For the first time, the picture was starting to become clearer. Calder wasn't alone. If records were being altered, if scans were disappearing from archives, then people higher up had to be involved. But the biggest question still remained. Why? Then Hannah sent another message. My mom once said that if the original reports ever became public, the hospital would drown in multi-million-dollar lawsuits. For a few seconds I couldn't even type. Then finally I asked, "Did your mom have proof?" She replied, "Yes." My heart started pounding again. "Where is it now?" This time there was a long silence. Then only one sentence appeared. "That's why I'm scared to even talk to you." My hands genuinely started shaking. I typed back, "What do you mean?" But Hannah went offline. I sent another message. No response. Third one. Still nothing. Then suddenly, a text appeared on my phone from an unknown number. No name. Just one sentence. "If you really want to know why your mother stopped fighting, ask your grandmother about the night of February 14th. My heart immediately started racing. Because February 14th was the exact date. Dr. Calder-Wynne came to our house for the first time. February 14th. The second I read that date, I immediately looked at my grandmother Mavis. She was sitting in the kitchen. The TV was on, but she wasn't actually watching it. I looked straight at her and asked, "What happened the night Calder-Wynne came to this house?" She looked back at me, but didn't say anything. I placed my phone down in front of her. "I know everything now. There were other patients too. Records were changed. Mom wanted to go to the police." My voice was shaking. Then why did she stop? For a long time my grandmother stayed silent. Then she turned off the TV. And for the first time, she finally stopped speaking in half-truths. "Your mother found out in February from that second clinic that her scans were not normal." I stayed quiet. She continued. "After that, she confronted Calder-Wynne and demanded answers. First, he claimed the report was inconclusive. Then he said repeat testing was necessary. But your mother already knew he wasn't telling the truth. Then why didn't Mom go to the police?" My grandmother took a long breath. "Because 2 days later, Calder came to our house." Now finally the truth was starting to come out. "What did he say?" She looked directly at me. "He told your mother that if this situation became public, he wouldn't be the only one going down." Yes. "What does that mean?" She quietly answered. The hospital administration had been hiding diagnosis delays. Now everything was starting to make sense. She continued explaining. Some expensive scans were intentionally delayed before being finalized in official reports. Many patients were placed under wait and monitor status so insurance approvals, specialist referrals, and hospital costs could stay controlled. But in some cases those delays became dangerous. My mother's case was one of them. So they changed the records. She nodded slowly. The original imaging reports were removed from archives. Diagnosis dates were later changed. Final system records were cleaned up. Now my mother's words finally made complete sense. If anyone tells you my illness was discovered too late, don't believe them. Because officially, her illness had been labeled as a late diagnosis. But in reality, the warning signs had already been there. I quietly asked, "Then why did Mom suddenly stop fighting?" My grandmother's eyes filled with tears. Because Calder told her that if an investigation opened, the hospital would have to reopen several older cases too. Yes. So, very quietly, she answered. One of those cases was Rachel Mercer. Now Hannah's mother was fully connected to the story too. Rachel Mercer's reports had been delayed as well. She had also become a victim of the same system. But the biggest reason was something else entirely. My grandmother whispered, "Your mother believed that if everything became public, other families would be forced to relive the same pain all over again. But she was dying herself." "Yes," my grandmother said softly. "And that's exactly what destroyed her inside." My mother had started recording conversations because she wanted proof. But later, she realized this wasn't just one doctor making mistakes. The entire hospital system was involved. Administrators, insurance coordination staff, records management. Everyone was doing their own part in the damage control. Yes. Then how did the truth finally come out? My grandmother quietly said, "Before she died, your mother secretly made copies of everything and hid them. USB drives, voicemails, appointment slips, second clinic confirmations. She intentionally preserved all of it. She wanted someone to find the truth at the right time. And eventually, I did." Later, Hannah Mercer's family shared their documents too. Then other families slowly started coming forward. An investigative journalist eventually began working on the entire case. Original archived backups were recovered. And finally, it was proven that multiple diagnosis timelines had been intentionally altered. Dr. Calder Wynne wasn't acting alone. But his name became the face of the scandal because he had been the primary physician dealing directly with patients. After the investigation, his medical license was revoked. Hospital administrators resigned. Multiple lawsuits were reopened. A state medical board inquiry began. Settlement records became public. And for the first time, people in our town openly admitted the truth. This was never a late diagnosis. It was a system failure. And some people had knowingly hidden it. A few months later, I visited my mother's grave. And honestly, that was the first day I truly understood what she had meant. She wasn't warning me about a doctor. She was warning me about lies. Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones everyone fears. The most dangerous people are the ones an entire town blindly trusts. If you were in my place, would you still expose the truth after learning all of this? Or would you walk away and move on? Or would you bury everything to protect your family? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know what people would do in a situation like this. And if you enjoy real-life suspense revenge stories like this, where nothing makes sense at first, and then slowly the full truth comes out, stay connected to the channel.